During the U.S. Air Force investigation into UFO cases, there were 12,618 reported sightings between 1952 to 1969. 701 remain unexplainable. Let's get into it. When speaking of UFOs, not always does it mean little green men zipping around space. It's more accurately the sighting of something unexplainable or unidentified in the air. But with the recent abundance of UFO information being released by the US Pentagon, it seems the world is being prepared for something whatever it is. But what most don't know is that there is a declassified book of documented reports that has been available for years. The name of this document is Project Blue Book. This project was directed by Captain Edward J. Ruppelt and had two main goals. One, to determine if UFOs were a threat to national security, and two, scientifically analyze UFO-related data. The way that the investigation works is broken down into 3 steps. Phase 1 is the investigation of the report. The Air Force Base nearest the location of a reported sighting is charged with the responsibility of investigating the sighting and forwarding the information to the Project Blue Book office at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. Then step 2. If the initial investigation doesn't reveal a 100% positive identification or explanation, then a second investigation is carried out. This investigation is much more detailed and the analysis is much more thorough, with scientific research and all involved must be separately submitted. Then the third and final step is dissemination of information concerning UFO sightings, evaluations, and statistics. This is accomplished by the Secretary of the Air Force Office of Information. Basically, spread the information out there. So before we get into the unexplained cases, let's go over how they solved over 10,000 of these cases. The guidelines. Most of the UFOs in the reported cases were some type of explainable phenomena. These range from missiles, balloons, birds, kites, searchlights, aircraft navigation, and anti-collision beacons, jet engine exhausts, condensation trails, astronomical bodies, and meteorological phenomena. Most fell within one of these, but those that did not were either A, insufficient data, or B, unexplained. Just a little on the insufficient data, it's a pretty broad area. It can range from duration of the sighting, date, time, location, position in the sky, weather conditions, and the manner of appearance or disappearance. If one or more of these elements is missing, it can be put into the insufficient data category. Okay, back to sightings. If you were to report a sighting, this is what you would see. It would be a detailed report that would be submitted, investigated, and analyzed. Fair to say that a lot of these were fake reports. Here's the thing about Project Blue Book though. It saw so many leadership changes that the scientific analysis started to get lazy and downright wrong. In fact, it got so bad that Congress got involved. However, what's suspicious is that it might have been on purpose. One particular case in 1965, 4 UFOs were tracked flying. The Air Force Base and meteorologists / police working with them all came to the conclusion that it was simply witnesses looking at Jupiter. I don't think this one needs much explaining on why it was pretty dumb. More botched investigations like this eventually led to a congressional hearing. After a decade, the Air Force decided to close Project Blue Book for 3 reasons. Their official report says, no UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by Air Force was ever an indication of threat to our national security. There was no evidence admitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represented technological developments or principles beyond the range of modern scientific knowledge. And there was no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified were extraterrestrial vehicles. Thus, Project Blue Book was discontinued. One thing that stood out to me while reading the reports is that there were multiple leadership changes. That in itself isn't the strangest part. The strangest part is that some just didn't care. Some would try to transform Project Blue Book into something else. One scientific consultant astronomer was deeply invested and had high critiques in 1968. Hynek wrote, "The staff of Blue Book, both in numbers and in scientific training, is grossly inadequate. There is virtually no scientific dialogue between Blue Book and the outside scientific world. The statistical methods employed by Blue Book are nothing less than a travesty." He had much disdain for one particular man, and wrote, "Quintanilla's method was simple. Disregard any evidence that was counter to his hypothesis. This is Project Blue Book. Even declassified, it still boggles my mind how nonchalant some of the leaders were. It's possible that this project had an ulterior motive, but I'll talk about that at the end of the video." I found the strangest cases of the 701 unexplained. Let's analyze them. What is surprising is UFO sightings were extremely common during world wars. They were so common, in fact, that the Allies nicknamed them Foo Fighters. The strangest reporting of this happened in late September of 1952. During this time, there was an extreme swell in UFO sightings, but the military was about to experience it for themselves. Military officers were doing NATO exercises in the North Atlantic when they spotted a triangular-shaped object moving extremely fast through the night sky. This was spotted by a captain and his crew. To put the scale of the entire NATO exercise into context, there were 200 ships, 1,000 planes, and 80,000 soldiers from multiple NATO countries, including large deployments from the United States and the United Kingdom. And this wasn't an isolated incident. One man had this to say: "No one really expected the UFOs to show up. Nevertheless, once again, the UFOs were their own predictable selves. They were there." The same triangular-shaped UFO was reportedly releasing a blue glow and was estimated to be moving 900 miles per hour by Lieutenant Commander Schmidt Jensen. The next incident with NATO was a week later when an American newspaper reporter named Wallace Litwin was aboard the USS Franklin D. Roosevelt, which also was in the military exercises. He was relaxing when he heard a commotion on deck. He rushed out to see several crew members pointing at a silver spear in the sky that was following the ship. He assumed it was a weather balloon and took 4 colored pictures of it and went about his day. He went back below deck and joked that maybe it was a flying saucer. This caught the attention of the ship's executive officer, who asked about the story, and upon completion told Litwin that there were no weather balloons released that day. This perplexed everyone, which led to the officer radioing the Midway, who also confirmed that no weather balloons and that none were unaccounted for. Litwin had this to say: "In other words, the sky above this NATO fleet were very carefully observed, and nothing flew overhead unobserved. But I knew that I had taken a picture of what looked like a ping pong ball 10 feet over my head." Project Blue Book took over and interviewed the Navy crew that had seen it. Some dismissed it as weather balloons, while others had doubt. After Ruppelt and Blue Book finished their investigations, Ruppelt was adamant it was a UFO. His final statement regarding the case: "It was traveling too fast, and although it resembled a balloon in some ways, it was far from being identical to the hundreds of balloons that the crew had seen the aerologist launch. As the saying goes, I saved the best for last. Maybe." This case was so perplexing and was the cause for the British military's interest in UFOs. The case in question happened in Yorkshire, England, and was reported by a half-dozen Royal Air Force officers and the aircrew based in Topcliffe, Yorkshire. While there's no official date, it's been said that this happened in the 1950s. But back to the story. As reported, British Meteor fighter jet had just completed airfield exercises over the North Sea and was just returning home to Yorkshire. As it had ascended to 5,000 feet, the crew on the ground spotted a silver circular object 7,000 feet above the meteor on the same trajectory. The object then began descending towards the meteor, swinging in a pendular motion similar to a falling sycamore leaf. At first they believed it was a parachute or engine cowling that had broken loose from the jet, but suddenly the UFO stopped, rotated on its own axis, and zipped away at alarming speeds. In the words of RAF Flight Lieutenant John Kilburn of 269 Squadron, who spectated the entire spectacle, "The acceleration was in excess of that of a shooting star. I have never seen such a phenomenon before. The movements of the object were not identifiable with anything I have seen in the air." Normally, UFO sightings are kept extremely under wraps by the Royal Navy and Royal Air Force, but this was unfortunately leaked to press, which of course led to it being on Sunday newspaper. There's so many fascinating UFO stories in Blue Book that I will definitely make a part 2. In my opinion, this year will have plenty of news and declassified information regarding them, and I'll be here to cover it. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.